welcome to the Sanford Museum, and first of all, happy Halloween! Today I wanted to talk to you about Sanford ghost stories. So please, if you have any ghost stories that you know, please comment and like this, but today we're going to talk about the Headless Miser's ghost. This is actually based on a real murder that did indeed happen, but apparently this story was big enough by 1891, written in an anthology series of various different stories called The Romance, The Tales of the New York Story Club. Their February 1891 volume 1 edition, number 1 edition, had this story written down. So, without further ado, I am going to tell you the tale of the Miser's Ghost. About halfway between Tavares and Sanford in Florida, several years ago, there lived an old bachelor orange grower, a miser in his own way. It was nosed around that he kept a great deal of money about his house. One day he went missing, and the parties of his neighbors spent many weeks hunting in the woods for his body, which was finally found where the murderer had hidden it, under a pile of brushwood near the house, but the head was missing. All the ponds in the neighborhood were searched and carefully signed, but it was some time before it was found, and then only because the rope that had been holding it to a big iron stove parted and the head floated. It was a ghastly object, first seen floating around in the pond with his eyes open and hideous wounds. The body was buried in one place, and as the head was not found till long afterward, it was interred into another grave. For a year after, the neighbors living within the radius of several miles were annoyed and disturbed by curious and dismal sounds that issued from the house which had occupied the victim. Several parties testified that they saw a headless corpse going around, bent over as if it was searching for something. Others not only saw the same thing, but also reported that they heard a horrible moaning noise, as if someone was in deep distress. Later on came other reports that were still more ghastly. A ghostly head, it appeared, was seen on the pond, then on the land, seeming to be moving in the air. One frightened witness said that he heard the words, "Why did they part us? Where is my body?" This continued till a party of 5 went out one night to verify the story, as they had no faith in such yarns. Proceeding to the house, they waited. At the time of midnight approached, they all grew nervous, but for the disgrace and jibes of their friends would have gone home. All at once an unearthly groan broke on their ears, as a headless form rose before their eyes. It was larger than a man, but it bore all the familiar features and dress of their old friend and neighbor. Slowly it went around the grounds, half bent over, as if searching for something, and then it wended its way to the lake. As they gazed, the lookers were horror-struck to see a bloody head with staring eyes arise from the water and float toward the headless form. The latter seemed to see it, rushing toward it, uttering a moaning noise. The head flew off, however, with a sound between a gurgle and a ghastly light, as the horrible race began. The watchers grew wild and sick as they gazed on the unearthly spectacle. First the head would pause in its mid-air flight to allow the form to get near. Then, as its long arms were outstretched to grasp it, it would float away with an unwillingness that made the horrible spectacle more blood-curdling. As the missed object wanted, each time the headless form would utter a heart-rending moan, stop a moment with bowed shoulders and blood streaming down its mutilated neck, and then, with a start, would begin again its wild chase. Sometimes the bloody head would pause till the form had almost touched it, and then, impelled by the irresistible force which it seemed seemed unable to combat would fly off a few feet and then try to return, being prevented by some power that seemed to distress it much. Not a word was heard from it, but choked groans and half-uttered moans were audible to all at the time. The spectacle of these two bloody forms chasing each other was horrible in the extreme, and the watchers say that it was the most dreadful sight they ever beheld, and that for days and nights afterwards they could not get the bloody vision off of their minds. This chase was kept up for 2 hours or more. Through the panic-stricken watchers, it was a deal longer. Finally, the form, after being tantalized by the unusual unsuccessful attempt, uttered a roar of rage and ran off into the house and disappeared. The head flying in the air overheard and then returning to the pond, where it settled down on the water and disappeared with an unearthly sound. The watchers waited for nothing further, but fled for home at once. The next day, 3 of them took courage, going to the graveyard, resurrected the head and body of the murdered man, placing them in one coffin, again buried them. This, it seems, to have settled the ghost, for no other reports of its kind were ever heard. It was only recently that it was known that the bodies had been thus united, as the parties interested kept their own counsel. But the neighborhood was glad to get rid of the ghost, and these parties now know have been thanked by their neighbors for their bravery and forethought. The murderer has never been discovered, though several men were arrested and tried. It was made a good deal of talk at the time, which was intensified by the ghost stories told. And therefore, that is the Ghost of the Miser. And as we said, this was based off of a true murder. There was a man named Samuel McMillan who was murdered in 1882 because he kept money on him. There was one man who was tried. He was found guilty and then he was acquitted. His name was Archibald Newton. If you would like to know more about this, the Sanford Museum has many different sources on the Samuel McMillan murder, but also there is a book written by Andrew Fink that is talking about the Headless Miser. We do sell that book at the Sanford Museum, so we highly encourage you to visit us this spooky season. Otherwise, happy Halloween! Head was not found. Okay, sorry. The head was not found. Where am I? Okay, several. The body was buried in place and the head was not found long. Afterward, it was interred into another grave. Okay, that was actually the right one. Gosh, Harry, you can't write.